They say nothing ever really changes in Maple Creek. The trees shed their leaves the same way they always have. The old men still gather at the corner diner every morning like clockwork. And folks still wave to each other from their porches whether they're friends or just familiar strangers. But one fall morning in 1991, something did change. Something so violent, so unexpected, it cracked the town's peaceful rhythm like a bone snapping under pressure. It started with a girl named Emily Carter. Emily wasn't anyone famous. Not the prom queen. Not the rebel. Not the kid in trouble. She was the kind of girl who made straight B's, volunteered to coach youth soccer, and loved pumpkin pie too much to wait for Thanksgiving. At just 20 years old, she had a husband, a 1-year-old daughter, and 2 part-time jobs. Life was hard, but she didn't complain. Not once. She was the girl who always said yes. Yes to the double shift. Yes to her teenage marriage. Yes to starting over in a town no one had ever heard of, Maple Creek, Oregon, population 8,400. She met Adam Carter at a 4th of July barbecue 2 years earlier, back when he was home on leave from the Air Force. Tall, lean, quiet. He had a steady way about him, the kind of steadiness Emily had been chasing her whole life. They got married 6 months later, packed what little they had into his beat-up Dodge, and headed north to Oregon, where Adam had been stationed. It wasn't glamorous. Just a rented duplex at the edge of town, the carpet permanently stained from tenants before. But to Emily it was theirs. When Lily was born, a soft, sleepy little girl with her father's dark hair, Emily felt like her life had finally aligned. She had a purpose. She had a future. So she did what she always did. She worked. She worked at the Tommy's Pizza House just off Highway 22, where the coffee was always burnt and the jukebox hadn't worked since '89. Emily didn't mind. She moved fast, learned every station, and never forgot a face. After just 8 months, she was promoted to assistant manager. They gave her a new red polo shirt and a set of keys that could open every door in the building. She wore both with pride. She'd often bring Lily in on her days off, the little girl crawling behind the counter as the staff cooed over her. To the regulars, Emily wasn't just an employee. She was M from the pizza house. Dependable, sweet, never late, always smiling. But behind that smile there were cracks. Adam was working overtime, doing maintenance on military aircraft until 2 a.m. some nights. The bills kept coming. The truck needed new tires. Emily's mom back in Tennessee was calling again, asking for help. And that fall, the cold started earlier than usual. Still, Emily never complained. She just did what she always did. She said yes. On the morning of October 3, 1991, a Monday, Emily made what seemed like a small decision. The pizza house was playing a local softball game that evening, and one of the night managers begged her to swap shifts. He promised to cover for her next week. Emily agreed. She packed Lily's diaper bag, prepped bottles, and slipped on her name tag just as Adam finished getting dressed for base. It was 6:45 a.m. when they all walked outside together. The air was damp, the sky still gray with morning fog. Emily kissed her daughter's forehead. Adam strapped the baby into the car seat and gave Emily the keys. Since they only had one car, he'd take the bus to the base after dropping Lily at the babysitter's. Emily turned toward the restaurant, the cold air stinging her cheeks. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that someone else was already watching her. At exactly 7 a.m., Emily unlocked the side door to Tommy's Pizza House and stepped inside. The morning routine was always the same. Inventory check. Mixer on. Dough prep. Coffee brewing. She liked this part of the day, the quiet hum before customers and coworkers arrived. No one to interrupt her thoughts. Just the dough rising and the sun starting to break through the clouds outside. But that day she didn't lock the side door. Maybe it was habit. Maybe she was expecting someone. Maybe she just forgot. Whatever the reason, it would be the last mistake she ever made. By 10 a.m., the general manager, Paul Jennings, was starting to worry. He tried calling the store 4 times. No answer. That wasn't like Emily. She picked up even when her hands were covered in flour. He decided to drive down and check things out. When he got there, the door was unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy, too warm for a fall morning. The dining area was quiet, but the floor near the restrooms glistened with water. Paul called out her name. No answer. He stepped behind the counter. The dough mixer was still running. Unattended. He moved toward the men's restroom where the water was pooling. What he saw when he opened the door would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emily Carter lay on the cold tile floor beneath the sink. Naked. Though. Her golden hair soaked with blood and water, tangled like seaweed around her face. Paul stumbled back, hands shaking as he grabbed the payphone by the kitchen and dialed 911. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel possible. Emily Carter, the girl who never said no, who had a baby waiting for her at the sitters, who always remembered to double knot her apron. She wasn't moving. When paramedics arrived, they found a faint pulse. She was breathing but barely. The wound on the side of her head told them what had happened. A .22 caliber shot just above the left ear. She was rushed to Marion General Hospital, where surgeons fought to keep her alive. But the damage was irreversible. The bullet had passed through the back of her skull and lodged near her orbital cortex. Her brain had begun to swell. Machines could breathe for her, but she was no longer there. Back at the restaurant, police sealed the scene. The water had been running for hours. A blue work apron had been stuffed into the sink, flooding the floor, an apparent attempt to wash away evidence. A white blouse, soaked and bloodied, was found in the trash can. Her bra had been used to tie her hands behind her back. On the ground near the toilet, 1.22 caliber shell casing. And on the counter, a set of fingerprints, smudged. No cameras. No witnesses. And no forced entry. Whoever had done this, they hadn't broken in. They'd been let in. The investigators had seen enough to know two things. Emily Carter hadn't let a stranger into the building. And whoever did this knew how the store worked. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No smashed windows. The service door at the back, the one Emily used each morning, was slightly ajar when the general manager arrived. That wasn't random. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was someone who knew where to go, what to do, and how to disappear without leaving a trace except one. A single .22 caliber shell casing that slipped through the killer's cleanup. That, and a set of master keys that were missing from Emily's apron hook. The detectives from the Maple Creek Police Department began their interviews that same afternoon. It didn't take long for the list of suspects to narrow. There were only 6 people in the entire store roster who had universal access to the building. 2 of them were out of town. One was working the night shift at a different Tommy's location with multiple witnesses. One was Emily. That left Brian Russo and Caleb Moore. Brian Russo was 19. A cook turned shift supervisor. Local kid. Quiet. He had worked under Emily a few times and was known for showing up late and disappearing for smoke breaks. Not hostile. Not dangerous. Just unfocused. The day Emily was attacked, Brian was late for his 10 a.m. shift. He walked into the pizza house on Elm Street at 10:17, according to the timecard system. When his manager asked why he was late, Brian shrugged and said he overslept. He had been out the night before drinking with his girlfriend and a buddy. Nothing unusual, except he looked pale, nervous, distracted. Caleb Moore was 22, a bit older, more reliable. He worked at a different location on the north side of town, mostly in the evenings. He was calm, soft-spoken, and had no prior incidents on record. But 2 days after Emily's death, both Brian and Caleb made a mistake. They walked into the Maple Creek main location, the very restaurant where Emily had been attacked, and sat down for a beer after hours. They talked, loudly. They mentioned her name. They mentioned a detail that hadn't been released to the press, the blue apron used to clog the sink. That got the attention of the new security guard, stationed at the restaurant after the murder. He made a note. Then he made a call. Detective Mark Halvorson had worked homicide in Oregon for 12 years. He was known for being fast, blunt, and hard to shake. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in patterns. When he heard about Brian and Caleb casually discussing details of a sealed investigation, he didn't hesitate. Bring them in. Brian came in first. He wasn't handcuffed, wasn't charged, just invited for a conversation. At first he was relaxed, cooperative, said he didn't know much, said he'd heard things from other employees. When asked who exactly, he couldn't remember. Then Halvorson slid a folder across the table. Inside, a photo of Emily's body. Not gory, just final. Brian blinked, looked away. Sweat gathered at his temples. Halvorson leaned forward. His voice didn't rise. It just narrowed. You know something, Brian. The question is whether you were there, or you just heard it secondhand. And you better hope it's the second. Brian said nothing. By hour 6 he looked pale. By hour 10 he looked broken. No lawyer was called. No parent informed. He was 19. Alone. Surrounded by men twice his age in a locked room with no windows. By hour 13 the tactics changed. Photos. Threats. Statements like, "You know Caleb's talking, right? You know what they do to kids like you in prison? You want your mom to visit you on death row?" By hour 17 Brian cried. By hour 18 he whispered, "We just wanted the money." The confession came fast after that. He said he and Caleb had broken in through the back. That Emily was surprised but didn't resist. That they took the cash, tied her up, and then things escalated. That Caleb was the one who pulled the trigger. That it wasn't supposed to happen. Halvorson stopped the tape recorder. And walked out of the room like a man with a solved case. But one thing didn't sit right. Caleb Moore was picked up the next morning. He was read none of his rights. He was shown the confession. And when he denied everything, he was shown photos. Emily, the blood, the empty restaurant, the casing on the floor. Halvorson screamed, slammed a chair, told him Caleb would die in a box unless he told the truth. Caleb's voice cracked, but his story didn't. He said he wasn't there. Said he had nothing to do with it. Said he didn't even know Emily was working that morning. He held out for 16 hours. Then, like Brian, he broke. He didn't confess to the murder. But he stopped denying. He started to agree, slowly, with the narrative Halvorson was feeding him. 2 weeks later, both young men were indicted for the murder of Emily Carter. The town breathed a sigh of relief. The headlines praised swift justice. And Emily's family, still barely able to function, clung to the one thing they had left. The belief that someone was being held responsible. No one asked why the DNA recovered from Emily's body didn't match either suspect. No one questioned why there were no fingerprints, no matching footprints, no stolen items recovered. No one questioned anything, because everyone wanted it to be over. By the time the indictment was printed, the people of Maple Creek had already made up their minds. Brian Russo and Caleb Moore weren't just suspects anymore. They were guilty. They were the ones who had stolen a young mother's life in a place that was supposed to feel safe. And the story the prosecution built was clean. Too clean. The trial was scheduled with unusual speed, just 6 months after Emily Carter's death. Her parents, Grace and David, sat in the front row of the courtroom every day, clutching each other's hands as if they might break apart if one let go. The DA opened with a promise. The evidence will show these men planned a robbery, targeted a vulnerable woman, and murdered her in cold blood. But the evidence was thin, almost weightless. There were no fingerprints, no murder weapon recovered, no matching DNA from the body, no surveillance footage, no eyewitnesses. What they did have was a confession from Brian that he had since tried to retract. And they had Caleb's passive agreement under pressure after 16 hours without a lawyer. The prosecutor painted it differently. He called it remorse. He told the jury Caleb's silence was the same as guilt. The defense attorney appointed to Caleb's case had never tried a murder before. He did what he could. He raised questions. Why didn't the DNA match? Why was the confession full of inconsistencies? Why wasn't anyone looking for other suspects? But he was up against a tide. A grieving town. A strong narrative. And a jury who had already seen Emily's photo too many times to believe she could have died at the hands of a stranger. The detail that clinched it, the one that made the jury's heads nod, wasn't forensic. It was emotion. Brian cried on the stand. He looked down and said, "I wish I could take it back." Even though he insisted he didn't kill her, just went along. Even though his lawyer tried to explain that the confession was coerced. The tears were enough. People believed tears. When the verdict came, it was barely a surprise. Guilty. Both men sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no celebration. Just silence. And Emily's mother, Grace, whispering thank you through her tears. The town exhaled. The newspapers praised the Maple Creek PD for their fast action. The mayor gave a press conference thanking law enforcement for bringing peace back to the community. And then, everyone moved on. Except Brian. And Caleb. And Grace. Prison does things to a person, especially when you know you're innocent. Especially when no one believes you. Caleb Moore lasted barely 2 years in general population. In 1994, he was beaten in the prison yard by another inmate using a boot with a reinforced toe. The damage was catastrophic. A fragment of his skull penetrated his brain. He survived, but he would never be the same. Partial paralysis, seizures, memory loss, and worst of all, confusion. The kind that makes you forget your sister's name, or how old you are. He was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Kirbyville, where he spent his days staring at windows that never opened. Brian Russo survived by going quiet. He kept his head down, didn't fight, didn't speak unless he had to. For 12 years he carried the weight of 2 lives, Emily's and Caleb's. At night in the prison library he read books on law. He wrote letters to Innocence Projects, to newspapers, to anyone who might listen. No one responded. Until 2003 when someone finally did. A group of law students at the University of Wisconsin-Madison picked up Brian's case. They read the transcripts, the confession tapes. They looked at the forensics again. The DNA mismatch, the shell casing, the missing murder weapon. And then, they found something. Something buried deep in a file box in the evidence locker of the Maple Creek PD. A letter. Written in 1996. Ignored. It was from Derek Marino, a convicted felon already serving multiple life sentences for robbery and rape. In the letter, he confessed, in haunting detail, to the murder of Emily Carter. He even described where he threw the weapon, where he stashed the stolen cash, where he kept the master key. He said he posed as a vending machine repairman, that he waited for her to open the door, that he heard a voice tell him it had to be done. He had schizophrenia. Voices had followed him since childhood. But no one believed the letter. The police filed it under inmate fiction. They never tested the gun he turned in, never ran the DNA, never matched the casing, because they didn't want to know. Grace Thompson had visited her daughter's grave every week for 12 years. She lit a candle, left flowers, and always said the same thing out loud before she left. They got the ones who did it, Em. You can rest now. She believed it, until the day she turned on the TV. October 3, 2003. The 12th anniversary of Emily's death. Breaking news. A new suspect. A new DNA match. And a statement from the district attorney's office. Christopher Russo and Caleb Moore were wrongfully convicted. The first time Derek Marino said he killed Emily Carter, no one believed him. The second time, they didn't even return his letter. The third time he attached a hand-drawn map. A location. A confession in chilling, unshakable detail. He didn't sound like someone making things up. He sounded like someone remembering. The letter sat unopened in a drawer at the Maple Creek Police Department for nearly 7 years. It had been marked, from inmate, already resolved case. No one tested the weapon he claimed to have used. No one searched the location where he said he buried the bag of stolen cash. No one pulled the file again. Because they had their men. Because reopening it meant admitting they were wrong. And in small towns, being wrong carries a cost no one wants to pay. When law students from the Wisconsin Innocence Project finally read Marino's letters, they didn't just believe him. They acted. They convinced the district attorney to run a fresh DNA test on the semen found on Emily's body. Technology had advanced since 1991. The results were clear. No partial match. No ambiguity. 100% match. Derek Marino. They ran the fingerprints again. They tested the .22 caliber gun Marino had turned over in 1996. The one no one had cared to analyze. It matched the bullet retrieved from Emily's skull. This time, the confession couldn't be ignored. Marino was brought in for a formal debriefing. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't hesitate. He didn't blink. He told the story as if he were recounting a mundane chore. Matter of fact, almost polite. October 3, 1991. It was still dark when he parked his rusted van behind the auto shop 2 blocks from Tommy's Pizza House. He was wearing a beige jumpsuit and carried a broken vending machine toolbox to look the part. He waited in the alley watching the rear entrance. At 6:59 a.m., the door opened. A young woman stepped in, red polo, clipboard in hand. Marino walked fast, knocked once, smiled through the glass. She opened the door without question. Inside, he told her he was from a vending service, here to check the machines near the soda fountain. She nodded, pointed, walked ahead of him. He waited until they were past the kitchen, pulled a .22 pistol from inside his jumpsuit. He told her to sit. She froze. He tied her hands with her own bra, then forced her into the men's restroom. He demanded she open the back office safe. She told him there wasn't one. She was calm, scared but calm. He said that made him angrier. After taking the cash from the register, maybe $312, maybe less, he stuffed her clothes into the trash bin and shoved a blue apron into the sink to flood the floor. He paused in the doorway for a second. She was looking at him. He said she asked, "Are you going to kill me?" He didn't answer. He raised the pistol and shot her in the side of the head. Then he walked out. Just like that. The detectives who listened to the confession said there was no moment of emotion, no sign of regret. He simply wanted to unburden himself. Not for Emily. Not for her family. For himself. Because he had found religion in prison. Because he believed in redemption. Because he believed God already forgave him. When the news broke, Maple Creek was silent. For a town that had once demanded justice loudly and proudly, there was now only discomfort. The newspapers printed retractions. The mayor issued a statement calling it a tragedy of process. No one said we were wrong. Emily's mother, Grace Thompson, received a call from the DA's office on the 12th anniversary of her daughter's murder. She thought it was a cruel prank. She turned on the TV, saw the press conference, heard the name Derek Marino, and dropped to the floor. I prayed for justice, she later said. But I never asked for the truth to hurt this much. She had spent over a decade hating two boys, one who cried on the stand, one who could no longer speak after brain damage. Now she realized the true killer had never even been handcuffed. She went to visit Brian Russo after his release, not because she forgave him, but because he didn't need her forgiveness. He sat across from her, thinner than before, eyes hollow, voice soft. He didn't cry, didn't plead. He only said, I didn't know how to say no. I thought if I just told them what they wanted, it would be over. She nodded. Not because it made sense, but because it was familiar. Emily was like that too. Always trying to make things easier for others, even when it hurt her. Caleb Moore would never understand that he had been released. His mental state had deteriorated beyond recovery. He lived in a facility 3 towns away, where nurses read him children's books and kept him from hurting himself. He no longer knew who Emily Carter was, but he said her name sometimes in his sleep. As for Marino, he was tried again in 2004 for the murder of Emily Carter. He pled guilty. No trial. No theatrics. No defense. The judge gave him another life sentence, his third. When asked if he had anything to say to Emily's family, he responded only, I don't think I should be forgiven. The system that claimed to deliver justice had done the opposite. Not just once but twice. And now, with the truth out, the silence was louder than ever. In the end, no one went home whole. Not Brian. Not Caleb. Not Grace. Not even the town that swore it wanted justice. Because some damage doesn't scream. It lingers, softly, quietly, until the silence is all that's left. Brian Russo was 31 when he stepped out of prison. 12 years gone. His voice was deeper. His back more rigid. But his eyes? Still 19. The reporters were waiting. Cameras. Flashbulbs. A few yelled questions he didn't answer. Do you forgive them? What will you do next? Did you ever hate Emily? He kept walking. They gave him a check. $5.3 million in compensation from the state of Oregon. Sounded like a win. A number big enough to impress headlines. But money doesn't put back the birthdays. It doesn't rebuild a name. It doesn't erase 4,380 nights behind bars for something you didn't do. Brian moved to Wisconsin. He changed his last name. Tried college. Tried therapy. Tried being a person again. He studied law. Graduated. Even passed the bar. But he never practiced. He said once in a podcast interview, one of the few he agreed to, you can learn how the system works. But that doesn't mean you'll ever believe in it again. Caleb Moore couldn't speak for himself. The injury he suffered in prison left him locked in a fog of partial awareness. He was 34 when he was transferred to a long-term neuropsychiatric center in Portland. He couldn't walk without help. Couldn't recognize his siblings. Sometimes he'd ask if he was late for work. The nurses said he had pockets of lucidity. Moments where he'd say Emily's name. Or cry without knowing why. He received $9 million from the state. But he never understood what it meant. Money for a life he could no longer live. Grace Thompson, Emily's mother, never returned to Tommy's Pizza House. It reopened in 1994 with new paint and a different name, but she never walked through that door again. She kept the portrait of Emily in her hallway, the same one she lit a candle under every year. She never moved it. Not once. The news of Marino's conviction didn't free her. If anything, it buried her deeper. She had spent 12 years believing she was fighting for justice. Now she wasn't sure who she had been fighting for, or what justice even meant. She tried to write a letter to Brian, but couldn't finish it. She started to visit Caleb, even though he didn't recognize her. Sometimes she just sat beside him. Other times she'd read aloud from a book Emily used to love. She once whispered, "You didn't take her from me, but I still lost her. And so did you." In 2005, Grace died from complications related to lung cancer. She was 69. She passed away in her sleep, holding a photo of Emily. Not the one from the funeral. The one from prom night, where her daughter was laughing in a way that only people who hadn't yet been broken could laugh. As for Maple Creek, it pretended like nothing had happened. A mural was painted on the side of City Hall, Justice and Community. The local paper ran an editorial that used the phrase systemic missteps instead of wrongful imprisonment. The police department never issued a formal apology. The lead detective, Mark Halvorson, took early retirement 2 years after Marino's conviction. He declined all interview requests. His official statement was just one sentence. "We did what we believed was right with the evidence we had." But the evidence was never the problem. It was the belief. The belief that getting someone, anyone, was more important than getting it right. The belief that people who cry must be guilty. That people who hesitate must be hiding something. That a girl who opened the wrong door must have invited it. What Marino took that day wasn't just Emily's life. He took her daughter's future. He took Brian's 20s. He took Caleb's mind. He took Grace's purpose. And what the system took was the truth. Some stories don't have justice. They just have endings. But this one has something else. A scar. Permanent. Visible only to those who bother to look beyond the headlines. Time has a strange way of turning horrors into headlines, then turning headlines into footnotes. By 2007, Emily Carter's case had become something Maple Creek didn't talk about anymore. Not because they forgot, but because they remembered too well. They passed the pizza shop every day. They saw the name changed, the new tile floor, the repainted signs. But in the back of their minds they all knew. Someone had died here. 2 others had nearly disappeared. And no one paid for it the way they should have. Brian Russo now lived 3 states away. No longer Brian. He had changed his name legally and quietly, renting a 1-bedroom apartment above a print shop. He didn't tell his neighbors who he was. He didn't attend alumni events. He didn't show up to reunions, press conferences, or panels on justice reform, even when invited. He lived small. Intentionally. As if staying quiet could stop the past from following him. He still woke at 4:07 a.m. most nights. The time the lights first flickered on in the interrogation room in 1991. He didn't keep clocks anymore. His compensation money went into 2 accounts. One for a therapy fund he rarely touched. And another for Lily Carter, Emily's daughter. He never contacted her. Never planned to. But once a year, on the anniversary of her mother's death, he mailed an anonymous donation to a scholarship fund under her name. No message. Just silence and a check. That was all he had left to give. Caleb Moore, meanwhile, was barely a name anymore. The staff at the Portland Neurocare Center called him Mr. Caleb. He had his own room, sterile, soft-lit, neutral. No mirrors. No sharp objects. He spent most of his time staring out the window, humming fragments of songs he couldn't finish. Sometimes he spoke. Mostly he didn't. On good days, he asked if he'd be late for his shift at the pizza place. On bad days, he didn't recognize his reflection. His sister visited monthly. His parents, not so much anymore. They said it hurt too much to see him like that. Like a body left behind by the mind. The town never officially apologized. But people knew. The clerk at the grocery store stopped saying hello to Caleb's father. The high school history teacher stopped mentioning local court cases during class. The mural on City Hall faded quicker than expected. Everyone knew. But no one said it out loud. Lily Carter turned 18 that same year. She was accepted into the University of Washington. Political science. She wrote her entrance essay about wrongful convictions. She never said her mother's name. She never had to. The essay went viral in a small, quiet way. Someone forwarded it to a reporter. Then to a podcast. Then to a producer in New York. Offers came in. Interviews, books, documentary deals. Lily declined all of them. She didn't want a stage. She wanted an answer. In an old interview clip from the 1990s, a news anchor had asked Emily Carter's mother, "What do you want people to remember most about your daughter?" Grace had paused, then said, that she didn't deserve it. That none of them ever do. Lily kept that quote taped to her dorm wall. Next to it, a black and white photo of her mom aged 20, smiling in a Tommy's Pizza uniform, holding her as a baby. Neither of them knew what was coming. By 2009, the state of Oregon had revised its interrogation laws. Mandatory audio and video recording. No more prolonged questioning without a lawyer present. They called it the Moore Russo Reform Package. But the name didn't bring comfort. Only proof that something irreversible had happened. Some scars fade. Others don't. The public thought closure came when Marino was sentenced. But closure isn't real. What's real is what remains. A young man who never got his 20s. Another who never got his mind back. A child who lost a mother she couldn't remember. A town that learned the difference between truth and convenience. Justice had arrived late. And it hadn't come clean. It had come with blood under its nails, and apologies that never quite reached the ones who needed them. It was a Monday. The kind of morning that feels like it never really woke up. 6:59 a.m. October 3rd, 1991. Emily Carter pulled her car into the narrow lot behind Tommy's Pizza House, killed the engine, and reached for her clipboard. She checked the prep schedule one last time. Inventory, dough mix, register, cash count. She was early. She was always early. The street behind her was still empty. The alley beside the restaurant was still quiet. And the world, for a fleeting second, was still gentle. Inside the car, the baby seat in the back was empty. Lily was with the sitter. Adam had already headed to base. Emily adjusted her name tag, tied her ponytail a little tighter, and stepped out of the car. The morning air hit her like a splash, not cold, just honest. She walked around the side of the building, unlocked the service door, and opened it. She didn't know it would be the last door she ever opened. In the years that followed, that moment would be replayed hundreds of times. In courtrooms, in news stories, in memories, and in dreams, the kind that wake you up but never let you leave. But there's something people always get wrong about tragedy. They think it begins with violence, with blood, with screams. But really, it begins with something small. A forgotten lock, a quiet mistake, a stranger with a calm smile. Emily's story was never about how she died. It was about how she lived. The girl who worked double shifts to buy her daughter shoes. The girl who danced in her kitchen while folding uniforms. The girl who always said yes because she believed the world would say it back. She was 20, and she trusted. When Grace Thompson, Emily's mother, passed away in 2005, she left behind a journal. Most of it was memories. Some were confessions. And one page, near the very end, was a note written directly to her daughter. It said, "I don't remember the last thing I said to you. I think it was something simple. Maybe, don't be late. Maybe, call me after your shift. But if I'd known, I would have said, you're enough. You're brave. And I love you more than the world knows how to say." Lily Carter never knew her mother. Not really. She knew the photo, the candlelight vigils, the stories passed down by others. But memory doesn't inherit itself. It must be carried. And Lily did. She carried it into law school, into advocacy work, into every time she looked at someone accused and asked, not what did you do, but what happened to you? On the 25th anniversary of Emily's death, Lily returned to Maple Creek. She didn't tell anyone. No press. No speech. Just one woman, a bouquet of sunflowers, and a small brass key in her hand. The key was the one her mother had carried, found years later in the evidence locker, tarnished but intact. She walked up to the back of what used to be Tommy's Pizza House. The building had been repainted. The ownership changed. But the side door was still there. She didn't open it. She just stood before it, quietly, and whispered, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom." The door wasn't the mistake. Some people are remembered by the way they die. But Emily Carter? She is remembered by the people who lived because of her. A daughter who fights for truth. Two young men who were lost, then found. A town that learned silence is dangerous. And a justice system that, even when slow, can still be held accountable. There's no resolution here. No grand moral. No satisfying ending. Just this. A door. A name. And a story that doesn't end. Because someone still carries it. Emily Carter, 1971 to 1991. She opened the door. And the world failed to keep her safe. But in her name, someone else will open another. And this time walk through it alive.